Nobody expected to see a Walker on the Voice stage. But there it was, gleaming silver under the bright studio lights, supporting a man who had no business being there according to every rule of modern television. 78-year-old Frank Martinez shuffled slowly toward the microphone, his weathered hands gripping the Walker's handles like lifelines. Blake Shelton leaned forward in his red chair, eyebrows raised in curiosity and concern. This wasn't just unusual, this was unprecedented. What Frank was about to do would shatter every assumption about age, dreams, and second chances. But it wasn't his voice that would leave Blake speechless. It was the story behind why he was standing on that stage at all. Let me take you back to the moment that started it all, because understanding Frank's journey makes what happens next absolutely extraordinary. 6 months earlier, Frank Martinez was a man who had given up on music entirely. His wife of 52 years, Elena, had passed away from Alzheimer's disease after a long, heartbreaking battle that had consumed the last decade of their lives together. Frank had spent those final years watching the woman he loved slowly disappear, one precious memory at a time. Music, which had once been the soundtrack of their beautiful life together, became too painful to bear. Every song reminded him of what he'd lost. Every melody carried the weight of conversations Elena could no longer remember, of dances they'd never dance again, of harmonies that would forever remain incomplete. He packed away his guitar in the back of their bedroom closet. He disconnected his piano and pushed it against the wall where it gathered dust like a monument to silenced joy. Frank settled into the quiet, gray existence of a widower who believed his best days, his music, and his reasons for singing had all been buried alongside the love of his life. Frank lived alone in the small adobe house in Tucson, Arizona, the same house where he and Elena had raised their 4 children, celebrated 52 anniversaries, graduations, birthdays, and every milestone that had made their life together a symphony of shared experiences. The silence was deafening. Neighbors would check on him occasionally, bringing casseroles and concerned looks, but Frank had retreated so far into his grief that even well-meaning kindness felt intrusive. He'd respond politely, thank them for their concern, then close the door and return to the emptiness that had become his constant companion. His children called regularly, worried about their father's isolation, but Frank assured them he was fine. He wasn't fine, of course. He was disappearing a little more each day, much like Elena had, except his disappearance was voluntary, a conscious retreat from a world that felt too loud, too bright, too alive for someone whose heart had gone quiet. Everything changed the day his 6-year-old great-granddaughter Emma came to visit. Emma was the daughter of Frank's grandson Michael, a bright, precocious child with Elena's warm brown eyes and Frank's stubborn determination. She possessed that fearless curiosity that only children have, the kind that asks difficult questions and refuses to accept half-hearted answers. She had been asking to visit great-grandpa Frankie for weeks, but the family had been hesitant. Frank's depression was obvious to everyone who knew him, and they worried that his overwhelming sadness might be too much for a young child to witness or understand. But Emma was persistent in the way only 6-year-olds can be, wearing down her parents with daily requests and logical arguments about why great-grandpa needed her company. Finally, Michael relented, deciding that perhaps his daughter's innocence might be exactly what Frank needed. The moment Emma walked into Frank's living room, she noticed something that all the concerned adults had overlooked. There, in the corner where it had always been, covered by a dusty sheet that hadn't been disturbed in months, was Frank's old acoustic guitar, the same Yamaha he'd bought in 1972, the guitar he'd used to serenade Elena during their courtship, the one he'd played at family gatherings, birthday parties, and quiet Sunday mornings when music was as natural as breathing. Emma's eyes were drawn to it immediately, the way children are attracted to hidden treasures. "Great-grandpa," she said, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence that had settled over the house like a blanket. "Why is your guitar sleeping under that blanket?" Frank followed her gaze and felt his chest tighten with familiar pain. He'd forgotten she would notice it, forgotten that children see everything, especially the things adults try to hide. Because Mija, he said, using the Spanish endearment that Elena had always used with their grandchildren. Sometimes music gets too sad to play. But Emma, with the wisdom that only children possess, the kind that cuts straight through adult explanations to the heart of truth, walked over to the guitar and gently pulled away the dusty sheet. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, creating tiny galaxies around the instrument that had once been the center of so much joy. "Great-Grandma Elena told me something about you," Emma said, her tiny hands touching the guitar strings with reverence, creating soft, random notes that seemed to whisper secrets in the quiet room. Frank's breath caught. "She did? When?" "Before she went to heaven. She said you sing the most beautiful songs in the whole world. She said that when you sing, angels stop what they're doing just to listen because your voice makes them remember what love sounds like." Frank's eyes filled with tears. Elena had indeed told Emma that during one of her increasingly rare clear moments in the final months, when the Alzheimer's would briefly lift like morning fog and allow her true self to shine through the confusion. It had been during one of Emma's last visits, when Elena still recognized faces and could string together coherent thoughts. "She really said that?" Frank asked, his voice barely above a whisper, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow diminish the precious gift of this memory. "Uh-huh. And she said something else, too." Emma's small face grew serious with the importance of her message. "She said that music doesn't get sad, Great-Grandpa. She said music helps sad people feel better. She said your voice is magic because it can make flowers grow and make broken hearts smile again, and remind people that love stories never really end. They just change into different kinds of songs." Something profound shifted in Frank's chest, as if Emma's words had reached into the dark place where he'd hidden his heart and gently coaxed it back toward the light. These weren't just the innocent observations of a child, they were Elena's final gift to him, delivered through the pure honesty of their great-granddaughter. Slowly, carefully, as if handling something sacred, Frank picked up the guitar. His fingers, arthritic and stiff from months of neglect, found the familiar chord positions that muscle memory had preserved. Despite his grief, he strummed once, tentatively. The sound was rusty, uncertain, the strings slightly out of tune, but it was music. Real music, alive and breathing in the quiet room. "Will you sing me the song about Great-Grandma?" Emma requested, settling cross-legged on the floor in front of him like an audience of one, her dark eyes bright with anticipation. Frank knew exactly which song she meant. He had written it 40 years ago for their anniversary, a simple melody about forever love, about growing old together, about promises kept through decades of joy and sorrow, sickness and health, better and worse. It was their song, the one he'd sung to Elena on countless anniversaries, birthdays and quiet moments when words weren't enough, but music could say everything. As he began to sing, his voice cracked with emotion and disuse, but Emma listened with the rapt attention of someone hearing magic for the first time. The lyrics came back to him as if no time had passed at all. "Through the years we've walked together, hand in hand through sun and rain. Every wrinkle tells a story, every gray hair worth the pain. You're still beautiful, my darling, like the day we said I do. And I'll love you through forever, Elena. My heart belongs to you." When he finished, Emma clapped her hands together with unrestrained joy and said the words that would change everything. "Great-Grandpa, you have to sing that on TV, so the whole world can hear how beautiful it is. Everyone should know about Great-Grandma Elena's love story, and everyone should hear your magic voice." Frank laughed, but it was the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. The sound rusty but real. "Oh, Mija, I'm too old for television. That's for young people with pretty voices and dreams still ahead of them. But your voice is the prettiest," Emma insisted with the absolute certainty that only children possess, the kind of unwavering belief that can move mountains or convince a grieving grandfather that miracles are still possible. And great-grandma said that love songs are the most important songs because they remind people that love never really goes away, even when people do. She said love just changes into a different kind of music, but it never stops playing. That night, after Emma and Michael had gone home, Frank sat alone with his guitar and thought about his great-granddaughter's words. For the first time since Elena's death, he felt something other than the crushing weight of grief. He felt purpose, possibility, and the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, his music still had something to offer the world. Over the following weeks, Frank began practicing again. His fingers slowly regained their flexibility, calluses reforming where they'd once been tough and sure. His voice grew stronger with each passing day, shedding the rust of disuse and rediscovering the power that had once made Elena fall in love with his serenades. Slowly, carefully, the music that had been sleeping began to wake up, stretching and yawning its way back to life. Emma visited every weekend, becoming his most enthusiastic audience and biggest supporter. She would sit in the same spot on the living room floor, applauding every song and offering suggestions with the fearless creativity of someone too young to understand limitations. "You should sing happy songs too, great-grandpa," she said one Saturday afternoon. "Great-grandma would want people to smile when they hear your music." It was Emma who, unbeknownst to Frank, secretly submitted his audition video to The Voice. She had recorded him singing on her father's phone during one of their practice sessions. The camera shaky and the sound quality poor, but Frank's voice came through clear and true, carrying all the weight and wisdom of his 78 years. The song was his original composition about Elena, and despite the amateur recording quality, something in his voice made the casting directors listen again and again. When the producers called to say Frank had been selected for blind auditions, he was shocked, terrified, and for the first time in months, genuinely excited about the future. "Are you really going to do it, great-grandpa?" Emma asked when Frank told her the news, her eyes wide with wonder and pride. "I think your great-grandma would want me to," he replied, and for the first time since Elena's death, he smiled without forcing it, the expression reaching his eyes and lighting up his weathered face. The journey to Los Angeles felt surreal. Frank had never been on an airplane, had never stayed in a hotel, had never imagined himself stepping into the world of television and celebrity. But with each mile that passed, he felt Elena's presence more strongly, as if she were traveling with him, encouraging him toward this moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. Standing on the Voice stage now, Frank felt every one of his 78 years settling into his bones. The lights were brighter than he'd expected, the stage larger and more imposing, the weight of the moment more overwhelming than he'd imagined possible. The red chairs loomed before him like thrones of judgment, hiding the faces of coaches whose opinions could validate or devastate with the simple press of a button. But he also felt Elena's presence, Emma's encouragement, and the knowledge that some songs are too important not to sing, regardless of the venue or the audience. Blake was still leaning forward in his chair, clearly intrigued by this unexpected contestant. In his decades of coaching, he'd seen every type of performer imaginable, but never someone like Frank. The other coaches, Kelly Clarkson, John Legend, and Niall Horan, were equally curious, exchanging glances that seemed to ask the same question: what was a man this age doing on a show typically dominated by young hopefuls? "Take your time, sir," Blake called out, his voice respectful and encouraging. "Whenever you're ready." Frank adjusted the microphone to accommodate his height, steadied himself with one hand on his walker, and took a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from somewhere beyond his physical body. When he opened his mouth to sing, what emerged wasn't just music. It was a lifetime of experience distilled into pure emotion. The song he chose wasn't his original composition about Elena, though that would come later in the competition. Instead, he sang "The Way You Look Tonight," but his version was nothing like any the coaches had heard before. It was weathered, seasoned, filled with the wisdom of someone who had lived every word he was singing. His voice carried the weight of 52 years of marriage, of watching someone age beautifully beside him, of loss that had nearly destroyed him, and of love that transcended even death. Each note was deliberate, earned through experience rather than technique. When he sang about the way she looked that day, everyone in the studio could feel the presence of Elena, could imagine the woman who had inspired such devotion, such artistry, such enduring love. Blake's button lit up first, his chair spinning around to reveal a face full of amazement and respect. Kelly followed immediately, tears already forming in her eyes. Then John, his expression showing the kind of recognition that happens when one artist recognizes genuine artistry in another. Finally, Niall, the youngest coach, turning with the humility of someone who understood he was witnessing something beyond his years. All four coaches had turned, but this wasn't about competition anymore. This was about honoring something sacred, the voice of someone who had earned every note through a lifetime of experience, loss, and love. When Frank finished, the studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't the typical excited cheering of a singing competition. This was reverence, recognition of something profound and authentic in a world often dominated by manufactured emotion. Blake was already out of his chair and walking toward the stage before the applause had fully died down, his usual casual demeanor replaced by something approaching awe. "Sir," Blake said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide, "I don't know what brought you to this stage tonight, but I'm honored to have heard that. That wasn't just singing. That was storytelling at its finest. That was a master class in what real music sounds like." Frank smiled, and for the first time since walking onto the stage, he looked relaxed, at home in his own skin. "Thank you, son. I came here because my great-granddaughter told me that love songs are too important to keep to ourselves. She said the world needs to remember what forever love sounds like." Blake's expression softened even further, and for a moment, the country superstar looked like he might cry. "Well, she sounds like a very wise young lady. And you, sir, just reminded me why I fell in love with country music in the first place. It's not about being young or flashy or hitting impossible notes. It's about having something real to say and the life experience to say it with authenticity." But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Blake turned to address the other coaches, then looked back at Frank with a respect that transcended the usual competition dynamics. His voice carried an authority that silenced the entire studio. "Frank," he said, using the older man's name with the reverence one shows to an elder, a master, someone who has earned their place through experience rather than fame. "I want you on my team, but more than that, I want to learn from you. You just showed everyone in this room what real artistry looks like. You reminded us that technique is worthless without truth, that power means nothing without purpose." Kelly Clarkson, herself moved to tears by the performance, added her voice to the tribute. "Frank, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard on this stage. Your voice carries stories that most of us are still too young to tell. You didn't just sing that song, you lived it, and you made all of us live it with you." John Legend, known for his sophisticated musical palette and respect for artistry, nodded in agreement. "You didn't just perform, Frank. You transported us. You made us feel like we were sitting in your living room listening to you sing to Elaine." That's the kind of authenticity that can't be taught, can't be manufactured. It can only be earned through a lifetime of love. Niall, the youngest coach, said simply but powerfully, "I hope, when I'm your age, I can sing with half the soul you just showed us. You've reminded me why I wanted to make music in the first place." Frank chose Team Blake, not just because Blake had turned first, but because he recognized in the country star something of his own journey, someone who understood that the best music comes from the deepest places of human experience, someone who valued authenticity over artifice, story over spectacle. Over the following weeks, Blake became more than Frank's coach. He became his advocate, his friend, and in many ways his student. Blake arranged for Frank to have special accommodations that would allow him to compete comfortably, a chair on stage when needed during longer performances, flexible rehearsal schedules that worked around his energy levels, medical support standing by. But more importantly, he learned from Frank's approach to music, his understanding that every song is an opportunity to connect with the universal human experience. "Frank taught me something I'd forgotten," Blake said in an interview during the live shows. "We spend so much time in this industry looking for the next big thing, the next young star who can hit impossible notes and dance complicated choreography. But we forget that some of the most powerful voices belong to people who've actually lived the songs they're singing. Frank doesn't just perform music, he inhabits it, because every song is connected to a real experience, a real emotion, a real story. The other contestants initially didn't know what to make of Frank. Here was a man older than most of their grandparents, moving slowly with his walker, needing help getting on and off the stage. But when he sang, age became irrelevant. His performances became the highlight of each episode, not because of vocal gymnastics or flashy staging, but because of their emotional honesty. During the battle rounds, Frank was paired with a 22-year-old vocalist with perfect pitch and impressive range. They sang, "Make You Feel My Love," and while the younger singer hit every note flawlessly, Frank's version made people cry. The choice was obvious. Frank advanced, not because he was better technically, but because he was more authentic emotionally. It's not about who can sing the highest note or who has the most perfect voice, Blake explained to the cameras. It's about who can make you feel something real. Frank doesn't just sing songs, he shares his life through music. In the finale, Frank performed his original song about Elena, the love ballad he'd written 40 years earlier and polished through decades of marriage. As he sang about forever love, about promises kept through sickness and health, about the way love transcends even death, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Blake stood behind him, not as a coach but as someone who had been privileged to witness the power of authentic artistry, someone who understood he was hearing something that couldn't be taught or manufactured. The lyrics that had started as a simple anniversary gift had become something universal. Through the years we've walked together, hand in hand through sun and rain. Every wrinkle tells a story, every gray hair worth the pain. You're still beautiful, my darling, like the day we said I do. And I'll love you through forever, Elena, my heart belongs to you. Time has changed us both, my darling, but our love has stayed the same. Though your memory's fading quickly, in my heart you'll still remain. I'll keep singing all our love songs till we meet in heaven's light, where we'll dance to our forever, Elena, my sweet goodnight. Frank didn't win the voice, finishing in second place to a 25-year-old powerhouse vocalist with commercial appeal and mainstream potential. But he accomplished something far more important than winning a competition. He showed the world that dreams don't have expiration dates, that wisdom has its own kind of beauty, and that sometimes the most powerful performances come from those who have lived long enough to understand what the songs really mean. When the results were announced, Frank smiled graciously and hugged his young competitor, whispering congratulations that were genuine and heartfelt. But the real victory was already his. He had honored Elena's memory, fulfilled Emma's dream, and reminded millions of viewers that authenticity trumps everything else in music. After the show, Frank returned to Tucson, but his life was completely transformed. Record labels called, offering contracts and opportunities that would have been unimaginable just months before. He began performing at venues across the country, sharing his music and Elena's memory with audiences who understood that some songs can only be sung by those who have earned them through experience. The walker still stands beside Frank's chair when he performs, not as a symbol of limitation but as a reminder that strength comes in many forms, that wisdom earned through years of living is its own kind of power. Every concert becomes a celebration of enduring love, of the stories that connect us all, of the music that lives in every heart that has ever loved deeply. Emma, now 7, sits in the front row at every local performance, beaming with pride at her great-grandfather, who proved that music never stops, it just waits for the right moment to sing again. She introduces him to her friends as the man who taught Blake Shelton what real music sounds like, and Frank always corrects her gently. "No, Misha, I just reminded him that the best songs come from the heart." The guitar that had slept under a dusty sheet now travels with Frank to every performance, no longer a reminder of loss, but a celebration of love that refuses to be silenced. And every time he sings, somewhere in the music, you can hear Elena's voice joining his, proving that love songs really are the most important songs of all. Because they remind us that Love never really goes away. It just changes key and keeps on playing, one beautiful note at a time, connecting hearts across generations and proving that some melodies are truly eternal. Frank Martinez showed the world that the voice isn't about age or appearance or fitting into predetermined categories. It's about having something true to say and the courage to say it, regardless of how old you are or how unconventional your story might be. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that have been seasoned by time, refined by experience, and strengthened by loss. And sometimes a 78-year-old man with a walker can teach a country superstar and millions of viewers what it really means to sing from the heart.